Thank you. Today I'm going to do two things, so if I go over, you guys can give me the hook, but I just thought it was important. ASHRAE has the Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization, so I want to give you an update on that, where things sit, the projects we're looking at, and then we'll talk about HVAC system and selections with decarbonization considerations. So they asked me to put in a couple slides in every presentation. The Distinguished Lecturer Program is brought to you by the Chapter Technology Transfer Committee within ASHRAE. ASHRAE is trying to add more distinguished lecturers with more relevant topics so that we can serve our members. And just so everybody is aware, ASHRAE Society pays for my transportation to get here. So when you have a DL, the transportation is paid by society. The evaluation form, ASHRAE wants to hear what you think about distinguished lecturers, how we can improve the program, so I encourage you to do that. The one thing is their lecturer presentations or opinions do not necessarily reflect the positions of ASHRAE or the chapter. And more information, ASHRAE.org is the website, / distinguished lecturers. The next one is, ASHRAE is a volunteer organization. We rely on members to do a lot of the work. So be it standards, be it technical committees, be it any of these standing committees within ASHRAE, we're looking for input to do it. I'm not sure how many people here are aware, but you can go to ASHRAE.org under technical committees and sign up on the spot. So if you're interested in renewable energy, you're interested in children, whatever the game may be, there's a TC, there's over 100 of them. You can sign up online and become what's called a provisional corresponding member. Once you do that, you'll get all the correspondence. So it's not necessarily that you have to attend the meetings, but you can see what's going on and see if it's something that interests you and see if you want to be involved. So I strongly encourage everybody to do that. The other thing is, you can either be nominated by your chapter at the CRC, the Chapter Regional Conference, or you can self-nominate. So if there's something you want to do, please nominate yourself, because like I said, it's volunteers that make society work. The last thing here is ASHRAE has a new strategic plan. How many people here knew we had a new strategic plan coming up? Okay, there's a couple people in the room. The last one was 5 years. They've made this one 3 years. We're trying to be more agile, more being able to move things quicker because times are changing. So the specific goals, you can see across the top, we want to be a global leader. We want to have impact-based engagement. The accessibility of ASHRAE. We want to try and make things easier for people to see. There's 4 main strategic initiatives. The first is healthy, sustainable, and resilient communities. The second is the empowered workforce. Many of you probably know Dennis Knight's, the current ASHRAE president, his presidential theme currently is empowerment of the workforce development. We all know we have an issue with the workforce currently getting qualified people, all the way from technician right up through engineer and beyond. So I think that's a very timely thing. Organizational agility. Trying to get things done quicker because times are changing. We have new refrigerants, new efficiency requirements, etc. We got to be able to get information and training into people's hands quicker. And lastly, emerging technologies. Times are changing. New things are coming out, there's new developments. You got to be able to keep up with that. So I encourage you to go to ASHRAE.org /strategic plan and get more. I just wanted to give you what the highlights were. It comes into effect July 1st of this year, which is the next society year. So with that, we'll move on. Let's look at ASHRAE's decarbonization efforts. If you're not aware, ASHRAE has position documents. This states what ASHRAE's position are in a number of things. They're actually approved by the board of directors. So the one on building decarbonization was published in June of 2022 and was reaffirmed January 2024. It is available as a free download on the ASHRAE.org website. Some of the key points from that position document is the projected building stock is expected to double by 2060. A lot of that is in the global south. Buildings are responsible for roughly 40% of energy-related GHG emissions. By 2030, the global built environment must halve its 2015 GHG emissions. All new buildings are net zero emissions in operation, and there's widespread energy efficiency retrofits of existing assets well underway. The other thing, embodied carbon in new construction is reduced by at least 40%. We're already in 2025. To try and attain these goals that ASHRAE has published, we all have some work to do to try and hit those 2030 targets. The other thing is we want to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's already set by a lot of countries and corporate entities. Now's the time for action. A lot of people have the plan, they just don't have the things to implement that to be able to achieve those goals. By 2050, at the latest, all new and existing assets must have net zero greenhouse gas emissions across their whole life cycle. Costas talked about both operational and embodied carbon. That's the whole life carbon concept. So net zero GHG emissions. And we want to equip the future workforce with the support of building decarbonization. So we want to eliminate those GHG emissions from the environment to address climate change. We've probably all seen, from a weather perspective, it's been the warmest globally for a few years running now. We're very close or even exceeded the 1.5 or 2 degrees, depending on which one you look at, to that. So we've got some work to do in order to try and do that. Those are those goals again. I just want to highlight those because I think it's very important for you to see ASHRAE has taken a very firm stance on where we want to be. So everybody here is probably wondering, with the change of administration in the United States, what's going to happen. I can tell you ASHRAE is still committed to building decarbonization. The board of directors has approved over $2 million in funds to help support building decarbonization. So it's here to stay. It's not going away. So 4 key focus areas: standards, education, technical tools, and the position document, which I've already talked about. As my responsibility on the board of directors, I'm actually the board liaison for the training and education committee. So there's a lot of pressure on that committee now to be able to get all the education out on all the building decarbonization things that are moving ahead. So I can tell you it's a very active committee currently trying to get that done. So when ASHRAE decided to get in the decarbonization business, or as a focus, we created what's called a task force. The Task Force for Building Decarbonization, TFBD, another ASHRAE acronym. That is a temporary thing. Anything that has task force is a temporary measure. So last year, July 1st, 2024, we wanted to make this a permanent standing committee. So it's now called the Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization, or CEBD. That's not CBD, it's CEBD. The web link is there, ashrae.org/CEBD. It is updated regularly. I strongly encourage you to check out that website if you haven't already. There's new stuff coming online all the time. And the other thing, if anybody has any questions or comments, you send it to decarb@ashrae.org. So that can be passed on to the CEBD. So one of the big focuses when we created that Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization is we said we need to get the members information. So the best way to do that is to create guides. And that's what we've done in terms of trying to get information into people's hands quickly. The first one to come out was on building performance standards, to help people, what can you do to have carbon in your building performance standards wherever you are in the world? And that is a free download. No cost to you to do it. The other one that came out is a heat pumps how-to guide. So if anybody doesn't know, that too is a free download. So I strongly encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't already. I can tell you they're working on an enhanced guide, which is due out later this year. But the initial information is out there. The other one that's been published is the Grid Interactive Buildings. And you can see the prices there. Decarbonization of hospital buildings is another guide that is out there. And the one that was published that I think is an interesting one is the TM65 NA. And although it's specifically designed for North America, it can be applied in a lot of places. The biggest problem that's out there now is not enough manufacturers have the EPDs, Equipment Product Declarations. This is to help assist you to be able to estimate what is in those EPDs when you're doing a whole life cycle analysis. So I encourage you to take a look at that. The costs are there. What the CEBD has done is try to get sponsorship where we can, get a lot of this stuff done. So for instance, the heat pump guide was through a grant from the Department of Energy in the US. That's why it's a free download, because of the cost for cover. What's going to happen with the new administration is anybody's guess, because if you probably heard, it's not one of the focuses on the new administration. The one that was just published, sort of in coordination with the Orlando meeting we just had in February, is Building Decarbonization Retrofits for Commercial and Multifamily Buildings. Two more that are coming out is a whole life carbon guide for building systems. So again, that's in both embodied and operational carbon. That's due out in April of this year. And a guide for strategic decarbonization plan. That was not one of the original guides that ASHRAE planned to do. But we had a decarb conference in New York City last year, and with NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy, they wanted to do this, so they helped fund that last one, the Guide for Strategic Planning. So I think it's a great thing. So we've got these guides out. Now we got to tell people how they can use them. If you've seen anything with ASHRAE, for instance, all the standards, there's a user's guide for seeing the ASHRAE 90.1 energy standard or ASHRAE 62. We're doing the same thing for guides and the training. So the ones that are coming out are solar energy design systems, or these were the ones that were these were done in Orlando. So that gives you the ones that we did do in Orlando. Solar energy, advanced design for zero energy, ultra low energy buildings and microgrids. That's the timeline of the technical guide series schedule as it currently stands. The initial plan was to try and get this done during Ginger Scoggins' year last year. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but I can tell you one of the things they're doing to try and speed up to get things out to you is using outside contractors rather than ASHRAE volunteers to get things done. So there's a cost to do that, but it also gives you speed to market. And I can tell you the CBD has been very cost conscious on what they're doing, whether it's done by members or done by outside people. But they've done a very good job managing the money. In terms of the training, the one is complete on grid interactive buildings. Decarbonization of hospital buildings is undergoing another review. Decarbonization building thermal systems is in its latest revisions with the contractor, Heat Springs the contractor, and the building decarbonization retrofits for commercial and multi-family buildings has not yet started. It's on the list. This gives you an idea of the timing on when they're hoping to get stuff out. The plan is to have all these out before the Phoenix annual meeting. Some future courses. How to apply whole life decarb strategies to new building design, heat pump application and operation, and a building decarbonization audit. George was talking about energy audits earlier. One of the things that we really need to do is make sure that carbon is part of any energy audit. You're not just looking for energy savings, but you're also looking for carbon. And one of ASHRAE's focuses is to make sure carbon is in everything we do. So whether that's in a handbook or whether that's in a standard, making sure carbon is in it. So one thing ASHRAE is trying to do is standardize all the carbon things that are in all the standards. Believe it or not, there was conflicting things between things. So we talked about, Costas put up a bit about it's a 100-year service life for GWP. That's what the standard is going to be. Some of the other standards were based on 60-year, not 100-year. We want it to be consistent across the board. So standard 240, which is what Costas talked about. There's also standard 242P, which is standard method for calculating building operational greenhouse gases. And standard 244B, which is sustainability assessment for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So 90.1 is supposed to be carbon neutral by 2031. So the committee has a lot of work to do to try and achieve that, but that's what the goal is. Okay, training and certification. The certified decarbonization professional is something ASHRAE came up with. I was part of the initial cohort that wrote the first set of exams. There were 64 people that passed that exam. It's now up near 100. It's one of the most sought after certifications ASHRAE has. They are working on a guidebook for that certification that is due out in the second quarter of this year. So you can see here, and this is a screenshot from the actual website at ashrae.org/decarb, the training that we have. So the Intro to Building Decarbonization training is a 3-hour course. I've actually taught that as an ALI instructor. That's one of the ones that's available now. Looking at more courses that we've outlined to try and get the information out there so people can get updated as to what they're doing. What CEBD did is they have a strategic planning session every year. And I don't know if people noticed, but if you looked at the membership survey you got the last time, there were actually some questions that were carbon related. They used some of that stuff to come up with what we want to focus on. So they actually had 23 things. They decided to go ahead with 7. I'm just going to go through what the 7 are. So you have an idea of what they're looking to do. So your famous Greek here, Costas, is actually the liaison from Tech Council to the CEBD. We are trying to do stuff where we can get research done if we don't have the information, and therefore getting funding from research as opposed to the CEBD having to do it, or partnering with somebody we can get funding to try and reduce the cost of getting things done. So the first one is having a flexible international building code framework. Things vary across the world in terms of what building code are. So we want to have something that's flexible that can be able to be applied globally. And you can see here, I'm not going to go through all this, but I just want to show you what they are. And I'm sure, are people getting a copy of these slides? Yeah, so you'll get a copy of the slides and you can go through that in more detail. And there's some more details. What the building code needs are, what the decarb measures are, code design, code development. and who the stakeholders are. And you can see there is a lot of stuff here for stuff that's been done and what the timeframes are to get this complete. The next one is updating the HVAC equipment service life. If anybody has seen the little pocket guide that ASHRAE has, the last time those equipment service life tables were updated was 2005. That's 20 years ago. So that needs to be updated. So we have to understand what the actual lifespan is when we're doing these life cycle analysis, to be able to do a true comparison and knowing when that equipment is going to have to be replaced. So we need more updated data. So whether that comes from a lab, whatever, but we need more data than what we have currently. A whole life carbon gap analysis. So we got to analyze the gaps that are out there in whole life carbon. If anybody has done whole life carbon analysis, you know there's a lot of details that are missing or you have to make some assumptions and stuff. I'm trying to make that easier for people to get stuff done, and how we can make things better to be able to do it. And this is where ASHRAE is working with other global carbon accounting organizations, et cetera, to be able to make sure we're doing the right thing. A whole life carbon calculation guide for building systems, saying up to 50% of a building's total embodied footprint can be from your MEP systems. So the goal is to develop a standardized methodology to calculate, report, and reduce the carbon emissions associated with those systems throughout their life cycle. A whole building MEP benchmarking data research. We need more research to know what this is across the various building types. So we need that done, and that's where we're looking for the ASHRAE research group to finance that. Residential retrofits. We can't forget about residential. So we want to do residential retrofits and summarize all the existing resources we have. Obviously, our residential building committee and standard 90.2, which is the residential energy efficiency one, are key players in that. But we want to make sure that we can reduce the GHG emissions in any residential retrofit. Decarbonization strategies for the supermarket industry. Supermarkets, as you know, with a lot of the coolers and stuff, have a lot of potential there. They're using a lot of energy. What can we do to help reduce that and therefore reduce their carbon footprint? And this is, again, trying to use with the experts in that industry to come up with a strategy to help improve and help members who are dealing with this be able to help. This came up in Costas' talk. Refrigerant emissions data. We don't have good enough data to be able to do it, so we need more current data so that we get a better handle of what the actual refrigerant emissions are. So that's something that's being looked at right now. Right? And if you look on the far right, the impact can be less than 1% to as much as 25% depending on the equipment type. Refrigerant, that's a heck of a spread. We got to try and narrow that down and get the right numbers in there. A3 refrigerants. You guys are using, for instance, R290 propane in Europe. It's not being used currently in North America. There's a lot of concern with flammable refrigerants. So we got to come up with a roadmap that the industry can use, sharing like best practices for what's going on in Europe that can be applied in North America and other parts of the world. Has anybody here heard of MEP 2040? Anyways, ASHRAE is a signatory to this through the CEBD. They are actually coming out with a guide on MEP embodied carbon that's due out April 22nd of 2025. So I encourage you to do that. They currently have 32 projects that were just launched in February get a better idea of what the whole life carbon is of that. So it's something that's really interesting. I think did a lot of benchmarking and other data to make that work. And lastly, ASHRAE, which is the authority that certifies what performance is for a lot of equipment. They're actually looking into this too. And we talked about EPDs, it's something ASHRAE is looking at as well, and what their milestones are and how they're going to do it, and actually have set up a decarbonization standards technical committee. So I know that's a lot, but I thought it was important for you to know ASHRAE is committed to decarbonization. This is the steps we're taking. This is what's here. They're looking for feedback. If there's something else you think ASHRAE should be looking at, please send that email to decarb@ashrae.org and get your input in. We're looking for feedback from members as to what's going on. So that's what I had for, I got one more thing. There's a global advisory panel that held a meeting in Orlando in 2025. So trying to get everybody from around the world with a common net zero building definition, remembering one size won't fit all, but how can we make this work? And we really need the global south and everybody else to be in there. How can we all get together to make that? So you can see who's a member of that. There are some people from Europe in this group. I think it's a great idea. And let's do some sharing of best practices, some brainstorming, and come up with the best thing that is good for all of us. Lastly, there is a decarbonization conference coming up in Chicago if everybody's interested, October 22nd to 24th. I know in 2026, they're talking about having another international building decarbonization conference. I haven't heard if anything's been chosen, but I know it's being looked at. Greece started the thing in 2022 for our first international decarb conference, and then we have one in Madrid. So we'll see where they're going to do that, but I think it's a very worthwhile thing. And the plan is to have one in the US and one elsewhere every 1 or 2 years. Okay, so that's what I had on that. I don't know if it's worthwhile taking questions on this now or move on to the HVAC selection. Anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot of information, but I just want to know if anybody has any questions on that.
No, please move on.
Okay. Like I said, if you want to give me the hook, do it. Normally this presentation I do is interactive. Because I threw the decarb thing in, I'm just going to go through the information. You will get the slides. I'm happy to discuss this later because I like getting input from the crowd as to what they think. But we're just going to go through what some of the key things are you need to consider. A simple example and then wrap it up. So what are the criteria? So when you look at what's in the handbook, temperature, obviously you have to maintain a certain temperature. To go along with that, you have to consider humidity, air motion, air-water velocity, water quality and or reuse, outdoor air quality or purity. You don't want to bring in outside air that is not clean. So for instance, if you have something that's next to a freeway or something, and your levels are high, you don't want to be able to bring in too much fresh air from them. Indoor air purity or quality. And rather than indoor air quality, I would say it should be indoor environmental quality. Number of air changes per hour. Acoustics. I know this is the hotel slot. Acoustics. It's important to have a certain level of sound in the room. You don't want fans that are too noisy or equipment that's too noisy that's going to disrupt your patrons that are in it. Local climate. You always have to take into account what is local in terms of the climate. Mold and mildew. Capacities. What's existing, what's proposed, and what's going to happen in the future. Are there any expansion capabilities? Redundancy. Do I have a small computer room in a facility where I need some backup. I can't afford to have that go down. Spatial requirements. One of the things people don't think about a lot in system selection is when I got to replace something, is it going to fit? There's nothing worse than going to site and finding out what we're going to pay and it's not fit. My suggestion is to always take a look at what you have. Don't necessarily trust the drawings because it's not always what it appears on the drawings. Environmental health and safety. You actually have to follow whatever your local rules are. Security. Are there special requirements for security? So be that the actual equipment itself, or if you have a BAS system, what levels do you need? Is there certain levels depending on what somebody's function is within the company? First cost, always a concern, no matter what. What is the first cost? But I think what you really got to look at is what is your return on investment and what are the energy consumption costs. Electricity costs are only going one way, and it's not down. They're going up. Operator labor costs. Maintenance costs. I always say a piece of equipment is only good as the way it's installed and the way it's maintained. So we heard about some maintenance today. I think it's a key piece in making sure that your mechanical equipment is tip-top shape. Serviceability. Not only do I have to put a system in, but I have to be able to service it. So there's no sense putting in, say, a fan coil with a drywall ceiling if I don't have an access door to get into it. Reliability. Resiliency is, I think, one of the key words these days to make sure your equipment does what it's supposed to do. Flexibility. Controllability. Replaceability. We talked about if I'm going to put this in, I got to make sure I'm going to be able to replace it down the road. Using the life cycle analysis, which I think is the proper way to do things, to make sure it's going to work. Sustainability of design. Seismic. If you're in an earthquake zone, you have to make sure you have the right protections in there. Filtration and filtration effects. We all saw with COVID, the need to change the MERV rating of filters, to bump the efficiency of those filters so that we're capturing more of the things. And what is the effect of that? You have obviously a larger pressure drop across the fan. Will the fan overcome that, especially if it's a direct drive fan? Changing codes and standards. Building codes and standards are changing. Are you going to be able to keep up with that, with what you're proposing? Other goals. You got to know when you want to start that up. When are the occupants coming in? I got to make sure the operators are trained. If I'm supporting a process such as the operation of computer equipment. Promoting a germ-free environment. So especially in hospital or medical fields, what steps do I have to take to make sure that germs are not an issue? Increased marketability of rental space. Does that mean if I have a higher efficient, more green building, I can get more dollars per square meter? Increasing your net rental income. The saleability of a property. I know here you have to have a building certificate on a building so somebody knows how efficient that building is. The public image of the property. And certification. Does it need LEED or even ASHRAE's building EQ to do it? What are the constraints? You may have performance limitations. What can you live with? What can you not live with? What is it you have to maintain in order to make it work? Code updates and our new codes. When the original equipment was put in, it was probably under a different code. What are the new codes? And you always have to look at the authority having jurisdiction to what exactly you have to put in. Available capacity, equipment, ductworks, pipe size. Available space, and you want to be able to have access in and out. What available utilities do you have? Everybody talks about electrifying, but do you have the power to be able to put in an all-electrical system, or do you have to upgrade the source coming into the building? Energy budget, is it cost driven or code driven? You have to take that into account. What's the efficiency? Most equipment now has multiple efficiencies. You have a base model, you have a high efficiency, you might have an ultra high efficiency. What is it you're restrained at there? Operator knowledge. Training for your operators, I think, is key in a building, especially a hotel, to make sure they understand the system and they understand the controls. The existing building occupants, building architecture. You have constructability constraints. You might have structural constraints. Can the equipment you're being be supported by the floor of the roof? How are you going to get the equipment in and out? Demolition and the impact on adjacent spaces and existing systems in operation. Here's the tricky one. If I have to maintain building occupancy and still have a system operating, what do I have to consider in order to make that happen? Ability to phase in the installation if necessary. Temporary HVAC. The availability. Obviously, delivery lead times. I know things have improved a lot. During COVID, we had a lot of problems with supply issues, but you really got to look at what is the schedule and what equipment can I get to get in there to meet what's being done and make sure I maintain the construction schedule. And of course, the budget. So once you have everything done, the best thing to do is list all your possible options, break down the pros and cons for each, weigh the benefits versus the drawbacks. Building envelope, something I think that doesn't get enough concern. You always have to look at the building envelope. I can tell you, I did a building that was existing DeVry Institute of Technology. It was converted to a courthouse. They did not look at the building envelope. Put in a new VAV system. I get called because it was a minus 20-degree day. It's cold in the intake area, and it's unionized workers. And I just went over to the window, and I could just feel cold air gushing in. I said, you have an overhead system? This is building envelope. It has nothing to do with its envelope. Nobody looked at the envelope. And to make things worse, they said, oh, can you go look at this room? So I did. I'm doing a double take. He said, do I see daylight there? The two walls did not come together. So no wonder it's cold in that wall. In there. Outline the constraints. Go over what the owner wants. The owner project requirements are very important. Narrow it down to a few choices and make a decision. In terms of decarbonization, energy consumption, obviously, the lower the energy consumption, the less I'm having greenhouse gas emissions. Electrifying. Can I electrify what I'm doing 100%? Personally, I think what's going to have to happen is it's going to be more of a hybrid approach. You can't electrify everything because a lot of grids won't support or have the necessary power to be able to do that. Refrigerant. What kind of refrigerant am I going to use? And I have to consider what the leaks are. Manufacturing, energy consumption of materials. That's all that stuff we talked about for embodied carbon. That's all the embodied carbon components. Can I do carbon capture and storage if I have a large industrial process? Does the grid work? Can I be able to send power back and forth if I'm able to put in renewables? And I think one thing that doesn't get enough, and it's probably not as applicable here in Greece as it is other parts of the world, is heat recovery. If I have a heating system and I'm putting all the hot air outside, can I recover some of that heat to use it elsewhere? End of life impact. Again, that comes into the embodied carbon. I got to get rid of the equipment. It's going to take transportation. It's going to take materials to do it. What's that going to cost? So I do have a simple example. I know I'm over time, so I'm going to leave this, but it was a simple thing to say, I had an existing 6-ton unit on a roof. There's been a change in space. They've changed the way they're using it. It now goes to 7.5 tons. What needs to be considered? This is where I normally ask you for your input. Number one, is the structurally is it going to take the additional tonnage? Do I need a curb adapter? Is the ductwork going to support a larger unit? Is it going to be too noisy? Is there going to be enough fan to do it? Just some of the things. The other thing is, I don't know what it's like here in Greece, but in North America, there's a lot of line of sight things. You can't be able to see a unit from so far back on the street without maybe having a fence or a screen or something. That's a consideration. And do I have enough power because I'm going from 6 ton to 7.5? So in summary, gather all the parameters, list the pros and cons and constraints, evaluate the options including decarbonization considerations, make the best recommendation, and remember there's no silver bullet. There's more than one way to do things. And with that, I apologize for going over, but I think it was important for you guys to know what's going on with decarbonization at ASHRAE.